It's one of my pleasures is to greet and introduce the Premier, the Honourable Kathleen Wynne. I realize that Premier Wynne needs no or very little introduction for our ROMA delegates. We have followed her career from Transportation Minister to Aboriginal Minister, Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, and the first Minister of Education. We all know that the provincial-municipal relationship is important to everyone involved. That relationship can be simultaneously delicate while also resilient. When the province and rural municipalities agree, it is great. When we don't, we keep talking and working on other priorities that matter to our rural communities and residents. Because we share a common interest to see our communities as a vital place for people where they can thrive. Please now welcome the Honourable Kathleen Wynne, Premier of Ontario.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Mayor Holman. Thank you so much, Ron, for the introduction. And it is great to be at this year's ROMA conference. I want to take a moment to acknowledge, as I always do, that since long before we began meeting here, discussing how we can strengthen our communities, long before our municipal or provincial or federal governments were formed, this land was a gathering place for many Indigenous peoples, and I want to show my respect for how First Nations and Métis people have helped to shape this area and give special recognition to the Mississaugas of the New Credit. At this moment in Ontario and in Canada, I think it's very important to remind ourselves that except for those Indigenous people, we all came from somewhere else. Most of us, or our ancestors, with not much in our pockets, but with hope for a better life, just as people all over the world, people in poverty or distress, look to Ontario and Canada now, we looked to Ontario and Canada, and we remain open to the world. That's who we are as Ontarians, and that's who we are as Canadians. Beaucoup d'entre vous avez fait un long trajet pour être ici aujourd'hui, mais peu importe d'où nous venons dans la province, nous sommes tous ici pour la même raison. Wherever you came from, we're all here for the same reason. Wherever you came from across the province, we're here because we care about the people in our community. You care about the people in your communities. How are they doing? Are seniors receiving the health care they need? Are there good job opportunities for young people? When the summer comes, are shovels going to be in the ground once again? And will the lakes be clean enough for swimming? My team and I value this opportunity to exchange ideas with you about how to build this province up for everyone. So thank you so much for your time. We're at the start of a big year for Ontario. On July 1st, our province, along with our country, turns 150 years old, and I think the context of that is an important one. We just heard in terms of reconciliation, in terms of Indigenous people, 150 years is not the span of time, but for our government and for the Canadian government, that 150 years is significant. A lot has changed in a century and a half. I think we can't deny that. The calls to unite Canada with a railway are now calls to unite us with high-speed internet. So the way that we're connected has changed, but what connects us has not. Ontario is made up of communities, the places where we live and where we work and where we raise our families. When I was growing up, the place I lived was Richmond Hill. It was a town of about 16,000 people at that time. But it's all of our communities that make Ontario whole, whatever their size. Alors, aujourd'hui, je veux parler de la manière dont nous faisons appel aux énergies de la communauté pour donner l'essor à notre province. Now, much of the time, I find that outdated stereotypes about rural and urban life overshadow this kind of discussion. When a politician in Canada really thinks that she can say, and I quote, "You can't borrow a cup of sugar in the city, that's a country thing," and thinks that there's an iota of truth in that statement, that doesn't help to change those stereotypes. Warmth and neighborliness are not confined to the country in the same way that tech and innovation and diversity aren't confined to the city. We all share in those. We all know that. Just look at how across Ontario, in cities and small towns, we've opened our doors to refugees from the Syrian conflict, supporting them as they start their new lives. We all share in that. So I don't have to tell anyone in this room that the challenges that people in Ontario face are not where to get cups of sugar, whether rural or urban. People struggle with isolation. They struggle to find enough time in the day for their families and their jobs. They struggle to get ahead, and then they struggle to stay ahead in an economy that is changing at an ever-increasing pace. These are our shared experiences, and they defy municipal boundaries. So the bottom line is that we have to face those challenges together. And that starts with building up our communities and preparing them for the future, a future that we can't necessarily predict. We can't predict all the aspects of that future, but we know that there are some components that we have to invest in. Earlier I mentioned high-speed internet, and I believe Mayor Alan Thompson is here somewhere. Is Alan, are you here? I think he is, he was. He's been a big proponent, I mention Alan because he's been a big proponent of this connectivity in Caledon. In an op-ed for the National Post, Mayor Thompson wrote, "This is not about binge-watching Netflix." And he's right. It's about students in Caledon being able to finish their homework. It's about their parents having the option to telecommute. It's about mayors like Alan attracting more investment to the area. And that's why we're expanding broadband across Ontario. One major project that's launched since I last talked to you is SWIFT, or the Southwestern Integrated Fiber Technology Network. This is a locally driven initiative, and it's going to speed up internet access for 3.5 million people across southwestern Ontario, including Caledon. That strengthens communities. That builds Ontario up. The work that we're doing together is making a real difference in people's lives. A good example is the Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund that we created with you to provide stable annual funding to build and repair rural infrastructure. So in the city of Clarence-Rockland, a double-lane bridge needed to be replaced, the Bear Brook Bridge. We heard from Mayor Guy Desjardins that a new bridge would improve quality of life, make the roads safer, and help with the flow of heavy goods traffic. So after a summer of hard work, that new bridge is open. Since we last gathered at ROMA, we've announced funding for almost 200 OSIF projects, from upgrading water mains and sewers in Blind River to improving roadways in Aurelia. We're making record-breaking investments in our province's infrastructure, in your community's infrastructure. And that strengthens communities. That builds Ontario up. Now, I know, as municipal leaders, there are many things weighing on your minds. One of the points of these meetings is to give us all a chance to look at progress that we're making and what new or recurrent issues need to be addressed, because we have to admit there are some things that come around. And one of the things that I expect is very top of your mind is the future of our rural schools. Education is at the heart of why I'm in provincial politics. I took my first steps into political life when my 3 kids were in school. I ran to be a school trustee because nothing was more important to me than the quality of publicly funded education in Ontario. And today, Ontario's public education system is a world leader. But we still have our challenges making the system fair to every family and to every child. Enrollment is declining in some areas, and that's putting a strain on resources. And I know it's a real concern in many of your communities. The only way forward, the only way that we can deal with a challenge like that is by working together. And by that I mean boards need to work much more closely together, and in many cases, keep a school open in a community by consolidating. That's right. And some of you know I've been saying that since I was the Minister of Education, and it is happening in some places, and in other places it's not happening. Boards and municipalities also need to work together and find solutions that make sense for their community. And we will work with you. It's exactly why I have a special advisor on community hubs, Karen Petrie, who is already working with some of you. So I use this example because I share your concerns, and I want to ensure that local decision makers are able to secure the best possible education for your kids. It comes down to the important balance that we have to strike as elected officials, and you deal with this all the time. It's how to help make the choices that will ensure families across this province can thrive today, but at the same time, plan ahead for tomorrow. The work that we're doing on climate change it's a really good example of that, and I know you have examples in your own communities. But if we look at climate change, tackling climate change is the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do for our kids. It's the right thing to do for our grandkids. We just have to be smart about it. That's why we chose an emissions cap program. It's the most affordable way for families and business to transition to a low-carbon economy. So finding that balance is the challenge every day. But it's absolutely essential that we do it because we have to, as elected politicians, we have to hold the present and the future in balance. And that's what we're trying to do. Another example of this is electricity. And you can imagine it's something that I've spent a lot of time on as Premier, because as I said, we got that balance wrong. I've said that repeatedly over the last few months. And I think it's important, as we talk about this, that we are honest with each other about how we got here. We have to acknowledge that not so long ago the electricity system was a mess. When there were record-breaking cold snaps or soaring heat waves, people were told to cut their power use. There wasn't enough electricity to go around. So the system was broken. We had no choice but to fix it. And so today, electricity is clean, it's reliable, because of all of the work that we have done together. Businesses don't worry about blackouts. Smog days are a thing of the past. But the cost of strengthening that system, of strengthening a fragile system that had not been invested in, that cost has burdened people in every corner of Ontario. So we know that there's more that we have to do. In the last little while, I've been setting aside time to call people who have written me letters directly or who have emailed me about their electricity bills. I want to hear the specifics of what they are going through. I recently spoke with someone from Mayor John Patterson's community. Michael was his name. He lives in Leamington, and energy is on his mind every day because he works in the greenhouse industry. And he's concerned by the pressure that electricity prices are putting on him and on the region. And he has every right to be angry. He has every right to have real questions about what's going to come next. Something needs to be done. You've told us that loudly, you've told us clearly, and I agree. So we've started by lowering electricity bills by 8%, eliminating the provincial portion of the HST from bills, and that's starting this year. We already removed the debt retirement charge. We renegotiated deals like the Samsung deal to get costs out of the system. We put in place the Ontario Energy Support Program. But starting in January, that 8% is coming off people's bills. For many people in rural communities, there will be an immediate savings of more like 20% rather than 8% because of changes to delivery charges. And all of that makes a difference. But we know there's more to be done. Earlier today, we announced how we're expanding access to natural gas. We'll offer grants to help build new natural gas infrastructure, and that'll help consumers and businesses switch away from electricity or oil onto natural gas. We're creating more energy options for people in rural areas because that will save them money. And it'll open up new economic opportunities. It will make a difference for the greenhouse where Michael works. But we still need to do more for people like Michael, so we're going to find more ways to lower rates and reduce the burden on Ontario consumers. We're looking at all of that through a lens of fairness. That has to be the test. Electricity costs money. Nobody's disputing that. There's a cost associated with it. But every month, People in our communities are struggling to cover the total cost on their bills. And we have to go forward in a way that is fair to them. And what that means is that we will take our next steps before the spring budget and move closer to that reality where people are paying the cost of the electricity that they're using. You know, I would say that there is no more important time. We have not had a more important time to listen to one another. People are feeling insecure, the economy is changing, there's uncertainty around us. Even as Ontario's growth is outpacing the rest of Canada's and our unemployment rate is at a near decade low, not everyone is feeling that in their daily lives. Many of the people who you represent are not feeling better off. I know that. I get that. And so in times like these, when there is uncertainty, it's easy for politicians to come along and promise to turn back time because there's a sort of longing, even if it's not articulated, but a bit of an inchoate kind of longing for what used to be, that somehow things were all better in the past. But we have to be very wary of those who are long on criticism and nostalgia and short on real solutions. You and I, all of us, live in the real world where our job is to solve the problems that are confronting us today. And as I said, at the same time, make sure we're laying the groundwork for the future. The past is not an answer. It can offer us some guidance, lessons about how Ontario has always grown stronger, how it will continue to grow more prosperous, and that it's by sharing our gains in the way that we have always done that we'll be able to move forward. That's a lesson that I think we should take from the past. Reinvesting in people and communities that make Ontario strong is what we have always done, and that's what we need to continue to do. The notion of inclusive growth, it may be new language, it may be a new term, but it's not a new idea. Universal public health care, the college and university system, the Canada Pension Plan, even our highways and bridges demonstrate how when our province's growth is shared, it creates those real everyday benefits for workers and their families that we know people need. And when people can get ahead, then that helps our economy stay ahead too. So the Ontario we're building together needs to be one where no one's left behind. And that's not just a nice idea, although it is, it's a good idea and it is what we believe, but it's also a fact. It's why we're making college and university education more accessible to people. Starting this fall, we're making average tuition free for some 210,000 students from lower and lower middle income families. And we're boosting aid to students from middle class homes at the same time. So right through that continuum of lower middle up into middle income families, we're supporting them to a greater degree than we have in the past. I was at Sault College last week and I talked to a student who said, you know, because of this change that you're making, I won't have to stop my education, go and work for a year, and come and finish my degree. I'll be able to continue on in my studies. And when young people do finish their degrees, when they finish their diplomas, we want there to be great opportunities waiting for them back home. Ontario's economy depends on it. So the investments that we're making together are about building those communities that bring young people back with programs like OSIF, like Connecting Links, like community hubs, broadband, and the Rural Economic Development Program. RED has funded more than 600 projects. It's supported small businesses in Minto, recruited teachers to classrooms in our northern and Indigenous communities, and helped the City of Kawartha Lakes to create a water research center, a project that has attracted 15 new businesses to the region. So that multiplying effect is important. And today we renewed RED to begin accepting applications again. RED projects are local. They're tailored to your needs, supporting what you need to help make economic growth more beneficial for everyone in your communities. So we're going to go on and we're going to keep making those investments. And we're going to rely on your partnership to get that right. As I said earlier, Ontario is made up of communities. And my team and I want to hear from yours. We want to hear from your communities. We want to hear the issues that you're grappling with. I'm traveling every chance I get. I look forward to continuing this conversation with you on your own turf, in your hometowns. I'll just end by saying this. Jane wanted me to, I read my speech to her last night, and she said that she wanted me to tell you that in the last few months, she has lent lemons, eggs, and a mix master to neighbors. And our neighbors check our heat when we're away. The people who share our wall, we're in a semi-detached home, they check our heat when we're away, just like in the small towns and the countryside all over Ontario. Community happens in Ontario wherever we live. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for the leadership that you show in every corner of the province. Have a great conference. Merci. Miigwech.